Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out to Red Edmonds. We're about to get started on this talk. Tonight, I've got actually a bit of a sore thing, so I'm going to try to be less verbose than normal. And just mention that we are a democratically run, cooperatively owned, worker-owned bookstore, radical bookstore, vegetarian cafe, coffee roaster. And I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. We have Emily Horn and Tim Bailey talking about their new book with Coach House Books, The Inspection House. And it traverses the spectrum from talking about the origins of the Panopticon concept with the liberal Jeremy Bentham, who initially thought of this as sort of counterbalance or something that would replace physical and corporal punishment, but we see that in the 21st century we seem to have the worst of both worlds, constant surveillance and constant corporal punishment and discipline, and give some good correctives and insight on the work of Michel Foucault, and generally is just a really neat book with a neat format, and I look forward to them talking about it. Before I let them speak, I do want to mention a couple upcoming events that are relevant. One of them is on November 13th, and it's a book called The First Civil Right: How Liberals Helped Build Prison America. So very much kind of in line, not classical liberals in this sense, but mid-20th century liberalism helped create prison America. So it's very provocative, and I'm sure it will be very insightful. And then on November 21st, we have Cory Doctorow, who's going to be speaking on his new book. And Cory Doctorow is a prolific blogger and writer. His new book is called Information Does Not Want to Be Free. Very excited to be here, so please mark your calendar. Sure to be at packed house that night. Finally, I just want to mention that the bathroom is down the hallway. You can get water down the hallway, and if you order food during the event, again, keep an eye out for it, and without further ado, welcome our authors.
Thank you. To whom it ought to concern. This is a field guide to the rich terrain of the Panopticon. Can you correctly identify a Panopticon? Knowing more about surveillance enhances our experience and helps us to share encounters with friends and family. Getting started. Who's watching you? Make a list of all the people or institutions that are tracking you. Are you being observed directly? Are there CCTV cameras in your neighborhood? Are your whereabouts and purchases being logged by your phone provider? Do you use a computer to access the internet? Are you carrying any credit cards or smart cards? Did you have to fill out a timesheet or report to a supervisor today? Did you hand in any assignments? Have you interacted recently with the police or emergency services personnel? Does your country conduct domestic surveillance operations? Do any other countries on your planet conduct foreign surveillance operations? Do you have friends or family who wonder where you are? Has your region been mapped? Do you ever pay bills or taxes? Do you use local utilities? Do you have any subscriptions? Do you have a to-do list? Do you track your fitness or diet goals? Can you watch back? Once you have completed the above activity, go back over your list and mark which of these agents you have observed in return. Can they see more about you, or can you see more about them? Is there anyone you can talk to about your experience being watched? The Inspection House has 3 central players, none of which are Cuban. The first is a collection of letters written by British philosopher Jeremy Bentham, describing his initial design of the Panopticon. The second is Discipline and Punish, a book written by Michel Foucault that reinterprets Bentham's Panopticon as an emblem for a particular way of organizing society. And the third is Our Strange Present Condition. We will use each of these characters to try to understand the other 2. Following the footsteps of our first 2 players, this book is architectural, though it contains very little architecture. Both Bentham and Foucault treat buildings as machines for discipline, tools for altering behavior. Their descriptions tend to be idealized or vague. We have chosen specific sites to illustrate the messy interface between power and history. Yesterday's ideologies are frozen into today's architecture. Today's ideologies must contend with or replace that inherited built environment.
letter 1, idea of the inspection principle. Written in Khrushchev in White Russia, 1787. Dear Redacted, I observed the other day in one of your English papers an advertisement relative to a house of correction therein spoken of as intended for Redacted. It occurred to me that the plan of the building lately contrived by my brother for purposes in some respects similar and which, under the name of the inspection house or the laboratory he is about erecting here, might afford some hints for the above establishment. I have accordingly obtained some drawings relative to it, which I here enclose. Indeed, I look upon it as capable of applications of the most extensive nature, and that for reasons which you will soon perceive. To say all in one word, it will be found applicable, I think, without exception, to all establishments whatsoever, in which within a space not too large to be covered and commanded by buildings, a number of persons are meant to be kept under inspection. No matter how different or even opposite the purpose, whether it be that of punishing the incorrigible, guarding the insane, reforming the vicious, confining the suspected, employing the idle, maintaining the helpless, curing the sick, instructing the willing in any branch of industry, or training the rising race in the path of education, in a word, whether it be applied to the purposes of perpetual prisons in the room of death, or prisons for confinement before trial, or penitentiary houses, or houses of correction, or workhouses, or factories, or madhouses, or hospitals, or schools.
So that wasn't our book, in case that wasn't clear. That was Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon Letters, which he published as a book in 1791. So as you can hear from that letter, Jeremy Bentham thought that this was the solution to every possible problem that you could have. He thought this building could be useful for basically any kind of institution, from a school to a factory to a prison. So just to give you a rough notion of what they look like, in case you hadn't seen a picture before, the idea of the Panopticon is it's a circular building, and the prison idea, or the prison form of it, is really the most canonical, so I'm going to talk about it as an prison. And around the outer edge of that circle are cells. And in the center, there's a guard tower. So the idea is that the guard can see from the tower into all of the cells, but there is a sort of a system of grates and lighting, which means that the prisoners can't see the guards, but the guards can always see the prisoners. So that's the basic form of the building as Jeremy Bentham conceived of it in the 1780s.
He thought it would be useful for everyone. The general idea of the space is that if you are one of the prisoners sitting in your cell, you're unable to communicate with your neighbors because there's walls there. You know you could be being watched because you can see the tower, but you don't know if you're being watched, which means you have to sort of assume at any given moment that you are under arrest. And so he thought you would behave accordingly, right? You would assume you were being watched at all times, so you would act as if there was a guard on you at all times. And so, like, you'd let the cops live in your head. Right? You would just behave as they wanted you to. And so it's this incredible labor-saving device for running a prison, because one or even potentially zero guards could be in the tower, and all the people potentially under surveillance would behave best. Right? And that's like a significant improvement over the alternative which was like warrens of cells and dungeons with like so many guards to wander through and look at them. It's like, and you have to put people in chains. And so he thought the Panopticon would be a much more benevolent space.
Yeah, he was really attempting to be humane, which for the period does make sense. But later on, that idea got taken up by Michel Foucault in the 1970s when he published Discipline and Punish. So what Foucault does is he takes this idea of a prison with guards who may be watching you and may not be watching you, and applies it to all sorts of institutions he was seeing in his present day in the 70s. And that basically caught on incredibly well. So if you look at how often the word Panopticon was used, there's a spike when Jeremy Bentham came up with it in the 1780s, 1790s, and then it goes way down. in the 1970s when Foucault starts mentioning it, and then goes up and up and up to our present day. Because this word, this concept, this metaphor for what we're living with now is used in the popular press. It's not just used by academics anymore. So that was one of the reasons why we wanted to write this book, to look at contemporary sites through the lens of this idea, see if it's still the right metaphor for the kind of surveillance we have today.
So I was warned by a friend who is also an author that you shouldn't give your entire argument at the book talk because people will be like, oh, that was really interesting, and then they leave. So we're going to talk about only one part of the book, but to give you a teaser, there's 7 chapters. Each of the 7 chapters focuses on a specific site. So we start with Millbank Prison, which is a site where Bentham tried and failed to build a national panopticon. Then we spent some time with the Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution, it's a temporary prison. Just spent some time with Camp Delta in Guantanamo Bay, then the Port Port Container Terminal, and then we go over to London to the Ring of Steel and their security systems, and then Oakland, we spent some time there talking about Occupy Oakland, the Community Awareness Center, and then we spent some time thinking about our lives. But what we wanted to do tonight was have a conversation with you all about this pair of jeans that I bought on the internet. So, I bought those jeans from allamericanstore.us, and its tagline is "Building America One Purchase at a Time." The brand of jeans is called Prison Blues. And, you know, all brands have like a brand story that they want to tell. And the Prison Blues brand story is like on the cardboard that comes in the back pocket of the jeans that you can see there. I'm just going to read to you what it says. For some of you guys are going to back. Yes, they're really made in prison. Prison Blues, registered trademark. The original, authentic, prison-constructed blue jean brand, manufactured by inmates at the Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution in Pendleton, Oregon, USA. By men who aren't necessarily your stereotypical hardened criminals, their fathers, sons, and brothers, interested in making amends for the choices that put them behind bars. And they make some of the most durable denim clothes that you'll ever lay your hands on. Find them. Check out that durable fabric. Peruse that careful stitching. Feel that fit. Weld in them. Fall timber. Build houses. Haul. Dig in the dirt. You have the freedom to choose. Made to do hard time. Made on the inside for life on the outside. So, I have never actually worn the jeans, and the conversation we wanted to have with you, although I don't know how that works with the microphone, was like, would it be ethical for me to start wearing it? And like, I'm happy to answer questions about how they're made and that kind of stuff. We have a lot of facts.
Does anyone have anything they want to say
Like
about
first
these
thoughts.
strange things? On mic.
Yeah, so they're made in Oregon. The Eastern Oregon Corrections. The question is how many it makes. The prison itself has, I think, 1,200 people. Yeah, not all of them work at so the company that makes the jeans is called Oregon's Corrections Enterprises, and this is very common in almost every state in the federal system have a semi-independent arm's length organization that does commercial work. So the majority, Oregon has this very weird situation where they, in their constitution, in their state constitution, 100% of inmates are required to do their right? They don't want any idleness in here.
This is a new development, relatively speaking. It came in 1994, so 20 years ago. But at this point, there are 1,200 workers who are working for Oregon Correctional Enterprises, but 14,000 prisoners. So that's far from the 100% that the Constitution requires.
most of the people in jail who are doing labor, there's some provisions for education to be counted as work. The majority of people who are doing labor in the Oregon system are working, they're helping to run the business basically. They're working the grounds, they're doing laundry work, they're running food, service, that kind of stuff.
This might be a tough question, are they paid? Is there a way to sustain them?
They are, we had a lot of trouble figuring out exactly what they're paid.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, prisoners are paid below minimum wage, and allamericanstore.us assures you that 80% of the wages given to the prisoners are redirected to a victim compensation fund, which is,
So they're paid but not really.
yeah, and like, there's this really heartbreaking documentary about like the prisoners talking about how great it is to work on the teams. Apparently it's a fun job, like it's wanted. And then there's like this one woman who's like, every week I can send $50 home to my daughter that she can buy shampoo with. And like, it's not a lot, but it means she don't really care.
So did you go into the federal system? Also?
We looked into, so we picked the jeans because they're the weirdest. It's very unusual for consumers to be able to get a hold of those in federal system is it's Unicorn is the name of the organization. And when you go to their website, a pop-up shows up immediately telling you you can't buy anything.
But if you are a federal government agency of some kind, then you can. So Unicorn makes things like furniture for state schools and for like things for hospitals. They make objects for other prisons. So it's all very much kept within either the state or the federal system, depending on who's making it. Is it ethical for Tim to wear pants?
There's no choice, they have to do it. So the prisoners have no choice but to engage in some sort of work in the prison, right? And so, I mean, we do have a word for this kind of forced labor, and it's called slavery. But that might be like one way that we could be able to unethical.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my answer to the question would be, having already purchased them, it is ethical to wear them, but not in public. And like, I'm actually serious when I say that. You're advertising, you're creating brand awareness by wearing them in public.
I don't agree with that, because I think you should wear them, and because they're controversial, or we get a chance to talk to people, so you're speaking
Have
tonight.
conversations like this, yeah.
Wasn't what I was going to talk about. So this, I spent 10 years traveling around the country teaching meditation in prisons. Mostly federal, and some state. New York was all state. And the system changed, over those 10 years. And there used to be opportunities, you can get a college degree, there's a lot of things you can do with your time. And then it became less and less available, and more and more, just punishment. So yeah, it was labor.
It's funny that when you're talking about that slavery in prison, but people, when you read the Constitution, most people will never think of this. And if you read the Constitution, all these concepts of rehabilitation and all of these things about rehabilitation, you understand what happened when slavery broke down and they just went and got people. Because the Constitution actually says, 13th Amendment, right? The 14th Amendment says that it never mentions black people or slavery. It mentions people. And it says that you have the rights, you have all these rights and you have these freedoms, and there's no forced labor or whatever, unless you are convicted of a crime. The Constitution actually says that, and most people don't realize it. It says if you're convicted of a crime, you lose all those rights, and basically you can be a slave again.
Exactly.
So nobody really talks about that and understand that that's not only institutionalized, it's systematic. It's a part of the Constitution that has never been changed and never been challenged. So there is some kind of psychology, institutional psychology, about what the prison system is that fosters and perpetuates throughout the system, that you have something like that in the Constitution.
Absolutely. So I've got the relevant bit of the Constitution right here. So just to give you a tiny bit of preamble, when the U.S. amended its Constitution for the 13th time in 1865 to ban slavery, it explicitly reaffirmed prison labor as totally okay. Quote, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof a party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So yeah, you're exactly right. And it's very interesting that when a huge part of the United States lost a bunch of its labor force, that in the southern states particularly, there was a lot of prison labor that came up directly after that. And a lot of people being arrested for offenses that would not otherwise be arrestable.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't understand whether it's just the nature of how we interact, but I don't really ever think the United States has ever been a philosophical or intellectual kind of, it's been an anti-intellectual kind of large culture. And I think that's a demonstration of that in the sense that even the people in the civil rights movement, even the very progressive movements, have never challenged that philosophically. It's more than just a law, it's a philosophical frame of reference that has never been challenged by any prominent person, a black person, or progressive, radical people, on any kind of level about that being an institutional thing that should be challenged, not just politically, but philosophically. And I always found that very odd and strange. Can you, I would like some comments.
Yeah, I don't have a very happy response. In our all too brief research, what we found was that the argument about prison labor and whether or not it should happen is more or less unchanged for about 300 years, which is this incredible phenomenon. So you find people arguing about it at the very dawn of prison and mass incarceration as a default mode of punishment. So back a little bit. So Foucault's book is talking about the transition from kind of the spectacle of scaffolds and executions in the town square and whatever else into the system that we have now, which is we don't know what else to do with people, so we put them away. Like this, our solution to all of the crimes is we put you away. And he's wondering how and why that happened, and so he tells a story about that. But even in the earliest days of beginning to send people away, there's this general agreement that people in jail should not be idle. And on the punishment side, it's like they shouldn't get a free ride. And on the jail redemption side, it's work is ennobling, right? How something can be simultaneously like work punishment and ennobling is an interesting and ongoing question. Yeah.
I'm talking about the philosophical challenge of 13th Amendment. That's what I'm getting to. Why do you say that's never been challenged?
So, I mean, the short answer I think is racism. Historically, what happens in the States is, and it's not new, but it certainly is intensified by the convict leasing system, which we can talk about a little bit. labor more fall on the side of it hurts free workers because it unfairly depresses wages, right? Workers don't want to have to compete against slave labor. It hurts private businesses because, again, unfairly depresses the price of goods that come out of prison, and so like, it's one of the few places where labor and management are in like complete agreement. It's like they don't want to be competing against prisoners, and it takes resources away from law-abiding people, right? So at times of economic hardship, when there's low employment, the argument is why are we letting prisoners do work we need work out here? Right? And those are not high solidarity arguments, right? And one of the problems is in the history of, you see it in the history of the labor movement, is that there's this tendency for white labor activists to distance themselves from prisoners. And a lot of that has to do with race. Because very quickly after the 13th Amendment is passed, the southern states institute piecemeal and in a variety of very different ways a set of increasingly insane laws that get unevenly applied and primarily end up finding ways to put free blacks back in jail. And then they set up systems where they're like, okay, we have these people and they're back in jail, and the 13th Amendment says that we can give those people hard labor. And so they set up privatized businesses